Okay, hello and welcome to another session of Alumni Career Conversations. We are still in beta. We are permanently in beta, constantly improving this new platform that we're bringing to you. I'm Erica Hodes with the Heller Career Development Center, and I am very excited to have with us today Isaac Cudjoe, who is a COEX alum from 2019. Hi, Isaac.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
I am doing. We are having a cloudy day here in Newton. My child is napping. Everything's great. So, how are you doing? Are you still in Massachusetts?
No, so I actually live in Maryland, have lived in Maryland for most of my life. So probably like 36 minutes outside of the DC area. Yeah.
Okay. And you are mostly just sitting in home working?
Yeah, I haven't been back at work since March, maybe a week before Maryland actually said people should stay home.
Okay.
I made the decision to stay home because I had just flown in from Ghana. And I was just like, you know what? Maybe I just stay home and see how this goes. And I've been here since.
Good. And you're healthy and safe and happy?
Yep.
That's
Happy. I wish things would be better this year, but yeah, I've found joy in the year. Yes.
That's great. I'm glad to hear it. So we have been doing a couple of these. We talk a lot about COVID, but I don't want to, just do that. You are working at Walden University, and you have been since shortly after you graduated. So can you tell us a little bit about what that was like, finding that job, what you're doing now, how you're enjoying it remotely?
So I think shortly after I graduated, to me, feels like an overstatement because it felt like such a long wait with the job search. So, you present your thesis in December and then you wipe your hands clean and you wait till February to get the degree. And that whole time it was application after application. And I think the COEX program did a good job of encouraging us to, and the Career Center to apply early while we were in that practicum stage and things like that. But for me, I took a kind of creative route with my practicum. So I wasn't really under this organizational umbrella where I was working hand in hand with the place that I wanted to work with. I was doing research that I knew that I was interested in and would probably use later on in life. So it was a pretty long journey. I think one of the struggles I had was I am 26 this year, and a lot of the places that I would apply to, I didn't feel like I fit the age demographic that they had, especially international development. I felt like there was this idea of like, oh, he's very young, so maybe he doesn't have the experience. And I actually had, I won't say the organization, but an organization during an interview asked me, hey, and they try to ask in the politest way, as all of them did.
The most legal way?
Most legal way, right? What would you say to me if I asked why we should hire you over someone who has years of experience? And my response was that, it's fascinating. There are American-born, students who gain an interest in the global South and, say, I'm going to go do an internship there and, be there for a week or two. And they finish and they're considered professionals or experts in that field. And there's those of us that were born there that lived in, experienced those things and then may have left due to migration. But it always feels like we have to prove ourselves. So I told him, I said, my resume won't allow this, but I'd probably write 25 years because the exact thing I was applying for was something that I knew like the back of my hand, had experience, family members had experienced. And that was my response. But, there's this structure built in place in this, job search realm where a lot of the expertise that I think Black and brown people have isn't considered expertise because they don't have certification or they haven't been doing it for so many years. But I always tell people that you can't intern in poverty. You actually have to live in it. Going somewhere for a week and knowing that you have a flight leaving there doesn't make you an expert of what's going on there. And so that was this battle I was having while applying places. And I felt like maybe my expectation, I knew that nonprofit jobs especially didn't pay the best. But I think when you look at like the take home and things like that, and you look at student loans, your idea of where you need to work early on in your career shifts a little bit. And I think that's sort of what I went through, where I was like, is it possible to have a take home of 32, 28? Like, how are you going to be able to, if you have X amount of loans? So I think those were real conversations I had to have with myself about how can I make change the way that I wanted to when I entered Heller, but still respect my limitations as an individual and what I needed to do and who I was caring for and all those things. So I think I applied to 80 something places. Eight
Woo.
something. And this is not a unique story. I still speak to a lot of people that I graduated with, and a lot of them, some of them are still searching, and some of them have found and then realized they didn't find the right thing, and these things happen. But it is a tough part of the journey, where you have gotten the certification, you've done everything you feel like you need to do, and yet the phone isn't ringing like crazy of like, hey, we really want you and things like that. So
Yeah.
eventually, I think for me, I started to think about transferable skills. And I think that's something that COEX taught me a lot of. And that's why I was interested in the COEX degree, was conflict resolution and coexistence. And I thought about negotiation. I thought about, mediation. I thought about monitoring and evaluation. I thought about how all of those skills were transferable to any field that I wanted to be in. And so when the opportunity at Walden University popped up, it was, I saw it in two ways. I thought about what is the place that people go to become social change agents nowadays in the world. And I think universities are that place. And Walden University prides itself on turning scholar practitioners or giving them the tools to actually go out and be social change agents. And so for me, it was a no-brainer. I'm like, how can I take conflict resolution and coexistence and transfer those skills into this role? And so I started there last August. So next month will be a year. And it's been, Walden University is also a B Corp. So some days it's like you're in corporate America, and other days you're at an everyday academic institution. And it is this interesting dichotomy that I love. It is stressful, it is fast paced, but I think that's what my degree prepared me for. And that's the transferable skills. So
I love that. When you were interviewing with Walden then, right, you mentioned this bizarre sort of circumstance where you actually have all of these years of experience, you just can't put them on your resume, right? And we always think of international development as a field as one that is maybe ideally better at equity, and thinking about what voices are we listening to. That wasn't your experience when you were interviewing, right? Not only as a person who wasn't born in America, but as a person who doesn't have white skin, right? So was that interview experience with Walden, was that really different for you? Was that something that you came to the table with and was respected?
So I think in some ways there was a little bit of a couple of strings being pulled at the same time. So I think on one end, I felt like it was almost fate, like God designed my path to go to Walden. And I tell people all the time that my interview with Walden was like no other interview I ever had. The president of Walden University believed in the things that I had done outside of my resume as well. He saw, the return movement, which I started while I was at the Heller School. He saw community action groups that I was doing in my community and was like, well, this is the stuff I want to hear you talk about. This is the stuff that makes you different. And some of that stuff I already had on my resume, but it was very different tone. It was man, tell me more. How can we help you? And the conversation was, well, how can we help you when you are working here? What can you do to continue those things? And he explicitly told me, I want you to continue being a part of your community while working here, and always tell me how I can be a part of that. So completely different, night and day. And the struggles I shared about, and it's something that isn't talked about. And I hope now, while we have all these anti-racist movements and things happening, the development field at large will actually take a moment to consider, have I hired more white experts over diaspora members that are living in the US, or international students that can be on the ground tools and on the ground, not tools, but on the ground thought leaders on the ground, like at the table with you, not because you're giving them a seat at the table, but because they belonged at the table to begin with. And so that was something that not only I experienced, but a lot of other diaspora members I spoke to would tell me that, hey, man, I'm having a hard time getting into these roles and these jobs, and I'm not understanding because I do X, Y, Z back home. I'm this. I used to do this, and so the interaction that I had at Walden University. Now, Walden University, for me, they blew me away with that interview process. It was like, wow, you have so many skills that fit into what we do. And they weren't bashful about it. And it was like, we really want you to work here. Let's go through some more interviews and things like that. And so it was night and day. I can't stress it enough, night and day. Yeah.
I'm so glad. I think this is one of the things, for our office we struggle with. It's so hard to counsel through those types of situations, right? We want, we tell you the things, right? You have to have the resume, you have to be something interesting at the table. But when it comes down to it, there are employers, even if they're doing social impact, even if, they're the dream employer on paper, that are going to look at someone who doesn't have American experience, someone who doesn't have a white sounding name, who doesn't have white skin, that whether they mean to or not, that all of a sudden you're 3 rungs down and you have to work extra hard to prove it. And it's hard for us because we want it to be the same, right? We want it to be, this is the advice that's going to get you the job. And then it's really discouraging for our students, especially right now, especially for international students. The visa situation immediately right now is hard. And I think it's something that we always struggle with, is how do we counsel students through this situation, especially if we haven't been there. Right. So I think I'm really glad that you had that experience at Walden. And I'm really sorry that you had the experience with the firms that are supposed to be better at it. But it sounds like you have the right job for you right now.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think the right job is the job where you can do what you're passionate about in 1,000 different ways. So I think Walden allows me to do that in 1,000 different ways, whether that's interacting at a residency with students, or if that's helping something with the executive team and trying to figure out decisions moving forward, and just being a help no matter what role I'm in or what position I'm in. And I think Walden has allowed that. So, yeah.
That's wonderful. And how has that shifted for you now that you're home? You said you've been home since sort of mid-March. What does it look like for the fall? What is it looking for you right now?
So because Walden University is a distance learning institution, and a lot of our students are graduate students who are adult learners, we haven't had an issue pivoting to online. It's almost what we do best. So in the same way that our students are mainly online, when it came to just everybody pivoting at home, it's been a pretty easy transition in terms of workflow. I'm sure for people's mental health or their day-to-day and things like that, it's challenging. But in terms of business continuity, we've done really well. And so I've been pretty impressed with how easy that aspect has been. And I think being at home has allowed me to also connect with some of my community organizations a little bit more. And being able to, from this seat in my house, be able to navigate and say, this is what we need to do, or this is what we need to plan, or how can I be present here, or things like that has been really helpful.
Okay. Speaking of online, I want to talk to you specifically about LinkedIn, because I remember when you first came to campus, I think it was the first week of school, you were one of the first people that came into my office, and you just sat down and you're like, I need to know how to use LinkedIn to kind of further my career. And I don't remember what I said. I'm fairly certain it was basic. I always start really basic. But from that, your LinkedIn presence is one that I still talk to students about. Right. You really got in there and you used it as a really great tool, and your presence there, I think, is really powerful. So how did that happen for you? How did you kind of go from, I think this LinkedIn is important, to being a superstar?
I appreciate that. I think for me coming to the Heller School, I had gone to an undergraduate university that also had a career center that was very LinkedIn. But for them, there was certain trainings that happened that I had gone to one that opened my eyes to how useful LinkedIn could be. But I remember when I was coming to your office, I was thinking, how can I use LinkedIn as a professional, like a graduate student, as opposed to an undergraduate student who's looking for interns and things like that. And I think people don't understand that you have to get expertise on the two different scopes, because they are two different scopes. Me at 19 looking for an internship in DC is very different than me with a master's degree who has experience in the field. And I think I was in Ghana for the Young African Leaders Initiative, and there was a training we had where the presenter was talking about how you are your brand. And it's not because you're necessarily selling a product, but you are the brand. And there's a story your brand has to tell. And I think for me, LinkedIn became this space where I could also tell a story about my passions, not just what I'm trying to get enrolled in or what I'm trying to get a job in. It was more so like, this is what I'm passionate about. And this is the work that went into it. So for a lot of the times, it's about sharing that story of, this is who I'm working with, this is when we're working on it, and this is who we're bringing together. And I think one great tip that I've learned is, if you put out what you love to do, the right people will find it. When you try to fake it and repost the same things that everyone else is posting, it gets repetitive. But when you share something unique to you, something that you're doing, and just be authentic, I think people start gravitating towards it because it's something that they don't see on their timeline all the time. And I don't know if I'm a superstar yet. Maybe one day I will be. But I think it's just being authentic about what you're building, and how other people can be a part of it too. So, yeah.
That's great. And you don't have a marketing background. You're not a brand manager. So this is something that anyone really can get on board with and do.
Yeah.
Were you using LinkedIn? Obviously the content that you're putting up has been great. I follow you on LinkedIn. But have you used it for networking? I'm thinking about the ways that our students are going to have to be networking in this like completely virtual environment.
Yeah.
And we always tell them, find the LinkedIn alumni, find the alumni from Heller that you can connect to. Is that something that you did while you were on this sort of slog of a job search?
So I actually realized two things that I don't know if people will want to do, but I think for me, I actually went through and deleted people on LinkedIn. And I know that sounds backwards, but I had in undergrad had a different perspective of what LinkedIn was. And I realized LinkedIn was kind of like building your ideal neighborhood and your ideal network. And so there were people that weren't in the ecosystem of my field at all that were in there, that were doing things, amazing things, but completely on the other spectrum of international development. Like they weren't even in that field. And I felt like it was almost, I was seeing a bunch of things on my timeline that had nothing to do with where I wanted to go or what I was passionate about. And so I sat down and actually combed through and said, okay, this person, and it was no bad blood. It was kind of like, for the purposes of creating this ideal ecosystem, this ideal network, I have to remove this, and this. And I think that was probably one of the things that helped me the most, because then I could start seeing people that were in my discipline and what they were working on. And it was motivating me because I was seeing more of their stuff often and saying like, okay, so-and-so is working in China right now and teaching English. Okay, well, so-and-so is actually in Bahrain or this and this. And it was motivating to see. But at first, when you were seeing things like people's little league football games and things like that, I was like, that just didn't, like, I want to have a certain emotion when I get on LinkedIn. It's either be motivated, be inspired, or be pulled in a certain direction. And I think you're pulled in a certain direction no matter what on social media. So if you can control that direction, it's really, really important. So the emotion that I want to feel when I'm on Instagram is very different than LinkedIn. And when I started to feel like the two were the same, I was like, this isn't working. So that was one thing. And then also in terms of networking, I think what people aren't taught is that your network doesn't have to be big for it to be good.
Say more about that.
You need allies in your corner that can always speak up for you. And that's something I did when I graduated from Heller, I had a conversation with a young man. I'm forgetting his last name, but we had talked about it was important for us to get accustomed to name dropping everybody we knew when we were at events, at things like that. And sometimes, I get invited to things that have nothing to do with my discipline, but I do know one person that does study that or is in that field. So it's, can I bring a plus one? Or can this person go on my behalf? And my inner circle of friends and colleagues, we started doing that for each other. Even something as small as, well, not small, but something as big as giving at a speaking engagement, quoting someone in your field that is also your colleague. I think a lot of the times in speeches and speaking engagements, people quote people who have died a long time ago. But what's the harm in quoting a colleague that has been searching for that, that legitimacy and things like that? So being strategic and saying my network doesn't have to be huge for it to be like really useful to me. So right now on LinkedIn, I think maybe I have like 270, if that, right? But I know that there's maybe of that 270, there's a solid 70 people who on any given day are probably name dropping me in the way that I'm name dropping them. So
I like that. It's definitely counterintuitive in the way that we always talk about like, oh, you need to have that 500 plus number, which I don't necessarily agree with, but I do think of LinkedIn as sort of a fluid networking, right? So it's not about how many you have, it's this quality issue. And at different phases in your life, those network connections are going to change how you use that network. It's going to change. I always tell students, to think about, if this person reached out to you, would it be weird? Right? So if you don't know this person and you just connected to them because it seemed like you should say yes, we have a lot of students who feel like they can't say no.
Right.
I have that too. But if they reached out to you, would you be comfortable having a conversation with them? Not because they're super powerful, like, yes, connect to those people, but if they're a complete stranger to you, are you really using LinkedIn the way that it was maybe designed to be? So I think that's good advice. I unfriend people on Facebook all the time.
That's a whole different, when I was going to grad school, I was very intentional. I made a whole new Facebook. Because I didn't feel like my colleagues in grad school needed to know what football team I played for at 14. I felt like they needed me too. When I finished grad school, I just kept the grad school one. I haven't gone back to my original one. Because like you said, the quality you're looking for changes at different phases of your life. And so I didn't really need to be as plugged in with 1,000 friends from high school. I needed to be plugged in with people that knew Isaac today. And so, it's the same concept on, it's counterintuitive for all social media, right? Even on Twitter, you could have 30 followers, but if there's that one that is an influencer in some way and they retweet your thing, the next thing you know, you have 30,000 retweets, right? So I think I understand that people think the higher the number, the higher the likelihood. But sometimes if you're not intentional, you're not actually increasing your chances at all.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I do not have a Twitter, and I feel really good about that. But are you using social media in other types of social media professionally? I think that I also have this kind of struggle between like, I'm very private, right? I don't want my work colleagues to know anything about me. But so I have this really strict divide, but some people are really fluid about it. So how are you using other kinds of digital tools professionally, if you are?
So for me, I think there's always two things in my mind. I want to be myself and authentic and always bridge that gap between I'm in the field that I'm in. I'm interested in international development and things like that because of my passions. Then they're things I'm passionate about. So on my social media pages, I don't want that to be a hidden identity. I almost think about it like it's like hiding a wife. Like it's something you love, someone you love. So why would I have a whole Instagram page without my wife present? And no, I'm not married. If anyone goes on that and says, "Where is she?" But I think I use my social media pages to be that connector of sorts to the things I'm passionate about. I don't even think of it as like the professional area and the unprofessional area. I think it's a more streamlined version of yourself that focuses on your job. And then all the other social media pages can be whatever you want. And it's up to each individual. So for me, because of the community action networks or groups that I'm a part of, social media is integral to what we do. So I'm usually on Instagram sharing something that Brothers with Books has posted or Return has posted or anything else that I'm interested in a part of. But also, I think most of my day-to-day involves social change in some way, whether at work or at my personal life. So it's kind of hard not to post about that stuff if people want to know what you were doing last week. And it's like, and I have to admit, I didn't post on Facebook for almost a year, just because I started to wonder if I was doing it for external gratification instead of internal one. And so I took a break from there and just started just focusing on what I was doing. And my close friends and things like that were up to date on what I was doing, but I wanted to see what it would be like to just not share what I was up to, because there is this instant gratification that I was getting when people would like things or, and I'm not a fan of being in front of cameras. That's why I barely looked at the camera during this conversation.
You're doing great.
I really don't like having my photo taken. It's very rare, and sometimes it takes maybe a month before I actually post something that I did. And so once I was finishing the Heller School and things I was a part of, there'd be like an article out or a post or things like that. I would actually just kind of squirm like, I don't want to be here right now, because I often don't want the attention on me. And I think that's something that my parents just raised me with, is that the things I'm passionate about should live beyond me. So if people fixate on me while I'm here, then they might not fixate on the movement. They might not focus on what is necessary to be done. So so I've gone through highs and lows of that, of like staying away from social media and then being back on. But all in all, I'd say that they're all a connector. But LinkedIn is not a dating app. It is not and some people do try to use it like that. And it's very dangerous, because it's supposed to be this streamlined place where you're trying to get professional networking done. So, yeah.
Yes, I have had more than one student talk to me about people messaging them in a way that is not professional. On LinkedIn, and it's always appalling to me. And then in the back of my mind, not at all surprising.
Yeah.
Right, because it's just another digital tool that it depends on how you use it.
Yeah.
My last question for you is not fair at all. But just because I think you said something really interesting about how we use social media. And how to do this activist work. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on social media activism, right? Especially, we're seeing a lot of people jump on bandwagons, and it's a sort of virtue signaling to say, I'm on board with this, but what then? And I'm curious if you have thoughts, especially as someone who kind of does this a little bit professionally. How do you think social media can or can't help us make change?
Yeah, so there's a Delegate Acevedo, who is a Maryland delegate. He has this this term that he uses, calls it performative wokeness. And it is something that is rampant right now, where social media is a quick fix. But I think it's important to acknowledge that we are all on different stages of this journey of understanding. Everybody is understanding something from a different lens at a different point. And so for some people, posting anything about what's been going on or what has been going on for a long time is their way of beginning to understand. And it is their way of processing. So I never want to deny anybody the opportunity to process, to get to that next stage, because I've seen some people who started off with just posting and then they evolved to, man, this is what I'm reading. Have you read it? And then they moved on to, hey, would you like to have a conversation in person? So I think there's stages, right? But it's hard not to get sucked into just doing symbolic acts. I remember when Sudan was having its uprising, a bunch of people changed their Instagram photos to blue to symbolize that. And I remember a couple Sudanese activists and people coming out and saying, like, that does nothing for us. Like, people are dying, people are hungry, people are suffering, and people are fighting for a revolution that, they had been fighting for a long time, but it had just finally become mainstream and people were aware of it. And, I always think back to that of like, it does nothing for me, right? And there's this book called The Displaced, and in the beginning, it's a collection of stories by migrants, refugees, wanderers of all kind. And in the beginning, the author or the main writer of sorts talked about how a lot of the times people who are in the space of doing good always say that they're helping the voiceless. But he argues that there's no such thing as voiceless people in this world. If you think somebody is voiceless, you just have never given them the microphone. Everybody is speaking. Nobody oppressed is silent. Nobody oppressed is silent, and they speak in different ways. And so for me, I've been thinking about, if you are caught up in that performative wokeness, at least put the microphone back in the hands of the people who are experiencing it. So if you are sharing things all the time just to share things, let it be from the people who understand the pain. Let it be from the people who are experiencing the oppression. And I think in that, you are still doing some good because you're amplifying those voices that people think are voiceless. So, and I'm not going to lie, it is hard. Everybody posted, a day, Blackout Tuesday and things like that, and even businesses and things like that. And you can get, I think some people get bullied into doing that socially, where it's like they feel forced to do it. Even if they are always on the front line helping out, things like that. And they might not agree necessarily with or feel like they need to post it. It is this group herd mentality of like, okay, I have to do it too. But like I said, I think everybody is a different place in understanding. Some people are still understanding racism as somebody not liking you because of your skin color, whereas there's people down the line who understand there's a systemic problem in place that, like, I personally don't care if someone doesn't like me because I'm Black. It's the fact that you can disenfranchise me and make my life harder. And so we're at different stages, and people should be given the freedom to process. And I think with grace and humility, you can give people another avenue. And I've had people reach out to me and say, hey, I know your community action group is doing XYZ. Is there something I can do? And that, I think, a lot, if you ask a lot of people who are part of organizations or grassroots efforts, they'll tell you that they've had to step up more in providing that, because some people are posting this stuff because they have nothing else they can do with their hands. And so giving people that space, when you do it, it's like, I saw a decrease in some of the people that volunteered at some of the things that we were doing. They weren't posting as much because they felt like they were on the ground doing something. And so people need to process what's going on, and they just need opportunities to do that outside of just social media.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so we are just about at the end here. Is there anything that you want to say to COEX students, any Heller student that, might be some advice for getting them through right now? We're going to be all online in the fall. It's going to be really challenging. What would you say to them?
Two things. I would say that what we're experiencing now is not unique to what we may experience in the world to come. And in being a part of this momentous time in history, we have to prepare ourselves better for whatever is to come. And we all do that differently. But I think that, the Heller Alumni Fund, or any fund that at Heller that helps international students, that helps students that are going through financial challenges, please, whatever. I know it's tough right now with people losing jobs and things like that, but any amount of money that you can donate goes a long way into helping those students and kind of safeguarding the integrity of our institutions when you have threats of not being funded or things like that. So I would say that plan accordingly, even in your activism. And then I would say that it is a crazy time, and don't let anyone tell you it's not. There's going to be a lot of things out there saying, if you didn't learn another language, if you didn't do stock, if you didn't do that, no, you're allowed to process. And in that process, you you will come to a point where you adjust. And we're not saying that this is a fun adjustment, but when you do adjust, work hard as you can, and know that your 100 doesn't have to look the same every day. Some days my 100 looks completely different, but I'm still giving my 100 that I have. So I would just encourage people. It's hard to give you advice on something that I haven't experienced. I don't know what it means to be a graduate. Well, actually, I do. I'm getting my PhD, so I guess we do know what. Thanks. It is a hard time to balance school and everything. But I would just say that if you can power through, that is also a part of the planning for afterwards. We need more conflict resolution people. We need more public health professionals. We need more public policy professionals. We need more SID people that are rooted in an understanding of social justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so what you are studying right now is integral for the world we want to build. So, yeah.
I think that's great advice. And I will also consider that advice when I feel pressured to learn a language during quarantine. Thank you so much for being here. And I think this was great. Thank you for talking to me.
No problem. Thank you.